Hi there, Dr. Joel Hunter here for yet another introductory video. This time I want to talk to you in greater depth about your discussions assignment. Now I touched on it when we went over the syllabus in the previous video, but in this video I want to dig deeper into the online discussion assignment. I think this is the assignment that probably would give or has given students the most worries going into it. And I want to try to alleviate those worries and give you some strategies for accomplishing this assignment, keeping up with it, and doing well on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the screen because so much of what I want to show you and tell you about is contained in your rubric, which is available to you on Course Canvas. If you go under Files, you can download your own copy of the rubric. In fact, you might want to do that while we switch over to the screen, and that way you can print it out and make notes, and if anything that is unclear to you, then you can contact me about it. But let's go into greater depth into the online discussions assignment. See you in a minute. Here we are with the aforementioned rubric, and what I'm going to do is actually show you two different files. First, we're going to go over the rubric, but then I want to show you an example of a contribution that scored a perfect score according to this rubric. And that way, I think if you put the two things together, both of which, by the way, are going to be available on Canvas, you can use this as a guide for forming your own contributions. So what I'd like to do is look through each of the criteria and then look over at the superior column, which gives of course, the best score that you can get in under each criterion. And you should look at the rest of them, the substantial, the average, the limited, the incorrect. So that's the performance score, and then the corresponding quantities that go with those. But you should look at those and see how each of them drops at least one of the properties of a superior contribution from it, so you can understand what kinds of things you have to avoid in order to get points docked. Okay, so let's start with the responsive to prompt criterion. So this can be summed up in a four-letter acronym: RTFQ. Read the full question. Many times students will score poorly on this criterion when they only answer part of the question. They don't answer the full question. Sometimes I post my discussion prompt has multiple parts to the question. It will always have some sort of theme or topic that brings all of the sub-questions together. But you want to be sure that you're responding to each of the, or rather than each, think of the full question. Okay, now that does not mean, let's say there are sort of three different questions contained within the full prompt. That doesn't mean that you just sort of list out answers to each of the three parts, because your contribution needs to be cohesive and coherent. It needs to be one response. So the idea is to weave together the responses to each of the subparts into a full, complete post. All right, so that's the key point here in the superior category to responsive to prompt. Now there's another part to it that is important, and that is that you address all the components in the discussion prompt in the initial post. So the initial post is whatever you post first for that week's discussion. And obviously this would be before the deadline that is posted in your class schedule for that discussion. You can, of course, come back to a post that you start in order, say, to get it in on the deadline, and follow up with additional posts to complete it. And I definitely encourage you to do that if you run out of time or you are in danger of being late. So you see what happens if that occurs. If you cover all the components, but you do it in multiple posts, then you get 2.5 points deducted. And then the fewer or the less comprehensive your answer is, the fewer points that you score in this category. All right, let's move to the next criterion. Demonstrate grasp of reading. This is very important, and this is where your close reading is going to pay off. You are in the superior category. Let's look at this together. It shows, your contribution shows an in-depth understanding beyond the obvious of the ideas in the reading or readings. The post uses clear reasoning to connect the ideas in the reading to the prompt. The post discusses those ideas through specific, accurate, and concise interpretation of textual evidence. I'm going to talk about this quite a bit when I show you the example. So there's three different components here within this criterion. So the main goal here is that you have to show that you've not only read the reading and that you are able to quote something that is relevant to the prompt, but you've really thought about the reading and you've thought about the prompt, and that pays off then in how you express your reasoning to connect your ideas, what you think a good answer is, to the reading, in the readings, that is, to the prompt. Okay, so this is why close reading, aggressive and slow reading, active reading is absolutely critical to success on this assignment. Okay, then there is the expression of the ideas that you put into the contribution, and there are three terms here that are really important. And to get an idea of what they are, let's look at the opposites. So your ideas have to be discussed. They have to be specific. The interpretation, of the textual evidence needs to be specific. The opposite of specific is broad, right? Is non-specific. It's broad. So you might generally sort of connect the idea to the interpretation of the textual evidence, or rather, your interpretation of the evidence is at a level of generality that doesn't really show that you've grasped what the text is saying. So the more specific you can be about the meaning of the text you're quoting, and about the meaning, say, of the concepts in the prompt, the better. Next term, accurate. So the opposite of accurate, of course, is inaccurate or wrong. So you want your interpretation to be accurate and not wrong. So this is where care and patience and thoughtfulness are really important. You don't want to make a silly mistake in interpreting the evidence. And lastly, there is concise. So what's the opposite of concise? Wordy. Two kinds of wordiness will often come out from a contribution that isn't well thought out. That seems odd maybe to think that a bad contribution would be wordy. You would think that, oh, I can't think of anything to say, so it's too brief, which that definitely happens too. But a wordy contribution, one that does not provide a concise interpretation of the text, what it will do is repeat. It'll be repetitive. It'll say give an interpretation which could be loose and vague or broad, and then knowing or feeling a certain uncertainty about that interpretation, the student will often restate the same thing, slightly changing words or moving words around. So that's one way that wordiness comes out. It's actually not saying much at all, but it's using a lot of words to sort of cover over a lack of understanding. So another kind of wordiness comes out in not being able to get to the point. And so a lot of times students will really grasp a text. They really do understand it, but they're simply too verbose in giving their interpretation of it. So think about getting to the point as quickly as possible. That demonstrates a really good grasp of the reading. It's not how much you say, it's saying it well. That's what really counts. Okay? Next topic, use of evidence. And I've already alluded to this in the previous criterion, because textual evidence is something you have to interpret in your in your response to the prompt. So in the use of evidence, let's look at this criterion in the superior category. Quote or quotes are relevant to the student's claim, and the discussion of the quote or quotes supports the claim. Quotes are presented in context by incorporating them thoughtfully in the post. Okay, so three sort of things to focus on here. Quotes are relevant to your claim. Okay, that means the quote is not is not randomly forced into an interpretation or into your answer. And that's one thing you want to avoid doing, is you don't want to maybe just because there's a word in the quote that you think is relevant, you push the whole quote into saying what you want it to say. So don't force the meaning of the text to say what you want to say. Actually let the text tell you what its meaning is, and then based on that, determine whether it's relevant to what you're trying to say. Okay, so the next point of this is the discussion of the quote supports the claim. And these two things go together. But here, what we're talking about is what you have to say about the quote. So the first part, the relevance, has to do with your ability to identify a textual evidence that actually does support what you want to say. But then there is what you say about the quote. The discussion of the quote supports the claim that you're making. Okay, so this is where you don't just drop a quote in and let it speak for itself, because they never do, unless it's a trivial thing. You know, like if Taylor Swift tells you she's never going to get together again, you know what that means, right? There's no effort required to explain that or discuss it. It just simply means what it says. Those are not interesting quotes at all. They're not going to support any kind of interesting, contestable ideas that are going to be part of these contributions. So what you will have then are quotes that do require unpacking or explaining or discussion. Okay, so that's where then the discussion of your quote is part of using evidence. So never let a quote speak for itself, or never think that it does, and never just let it sit there. You need to surround it by your own discussion of what it means and the point that you're making with that quote. Okay, and the last point here is the quotes are presented in context by incorporating them thoughtfully in the post, which I just alluded to. You don't simply say put a quote at the very beginning of your contribution and just let it stand there, and then just start talking. Instead, what you do is it's your idea, so you're expressing a response to the prompt. So you begin with your own thoughts, your own voice, and then as the quotes help support your ideas, you bring them into your sentences and incorporate them that way. That's what that means. Okay? Next topic, responsive to peer discussion. Okay, so in the online discussion, you have two components, right? You have your original contribution, which is the 200-word requirement, and that's what the due date for the discussion is there for. But then you also have a second type of contribution, and this is where you post a reply to at least one other student's post. And notice I stressed at least one. You can always improve your chances of a good discussion score for the week by engaging in multiple participants or taking on multiple points, not just the point that you've made in your own contribution. Okay, so that's what you want to do then. You're posting not only your own contribution, but then at least one other post that is a reply to another student's post. And what you're doing in that reply is you're building upon that student's post. You are disagreeing with it, and giving reasons for your disagreement, or you're rethinking the student's point and taking it maybe in another direction. Things like that. Those are good contributions. So I express it here in the superior category as follows. Shows concerted effort to engage with participants. Multiple points from multiple participants clearly built upon and critiqued. It interacts easily and accurately with more than 2 posts in the topic. So for the sake of our course, I'm not making the 2 post requirement necessary, but I am making the multiple points or multiple participants as a way of standing out from the minimum that's required. So that's what the superior is there for. Okay, so you aren't required to respond to multiple participants, but I encourage you to do it in order to give yourself better chances. You can still get a superior score if you respond to only one participant, but it has to be a very good response, and it has to meet the requirements that I've discussed both in the syllabus and here on the rubric. Okay, I hope that's clear. If there's any questions about that, then contact me. The point being, again, that, and as I say in the syllabus, if you apply to more than 1 point and or more than 1 student, you're going to be eligible for even higher scores. So that's, I'll reward you for doing that. So I guess what that means is if you write a perfect original contribution of your own, that gets scored. And then if you respond, well to the peer discussion component, but then you go over the required amount of effort, you can score more than 50 points on the discussion. Is the point I guess I'm making. Okay, good. I hope that was clear. I probably did not do a very good job making that clear, but if it isn't clear after you listen to this 10 times, then I'm kidding. If it's not clear, please contact me and I'll be glad to clear it up by email. All right, gang. So last point, and not to be overlooked, is the quality of your prose. You're writing academic prose, right? So let's look at the requirements here. Clear, engaging academic prose. 0 errors, capital letters 0 errors in word usage, verb tenses, subject-verb agreement and number, use of articles, pronouns and prepositions, spelling, punctuation and capitalization. Quotes are accurately cited. So the example that I've picked for you is superior in this way. There are none of these grammatical or diction errors. The quotes are accurately cited and correctly cited, and there's simply no mechanical errors of writing. So this, I think this will help you see the kind of goal that you are striving for in the prose. So what I recommend, based on what I've gone over here in the rubric, is that rather than waiting until, say, 30 minutes before the deadline, so that would be what, 11:25 on the night that the contribution is due, that you instead start your response early in the week, maybe on the first day that you get the discussion prompt, and you've done enough of the reading to be able to put together something, maybe just a sentence or two. Start your contribution in your own word processing software, and start it, and then build on it a little bit each day, so that you have time to revise it and refine it and make it excellent. So I would strongly suggest that you spread this writing this short contribution, spread it out over multiple days, so that you can eliminate all the errors that are just kind of pointless, that are needless. So with that said, there is your discussion rubric, and you can download your own copy. Hopefully you had it while watching this video and you scribbled down some notes. So of course you can look at the categories, how these are described over here, and these are simply there to explain if you get a grade that is not to your liking, that there will be specific feedback then for why you got the grade that you got. Okay, and then if you have questions about how to if you don't know how to improve in any of these categories, that's the sort of thing I definitely want to be able to work with you about. And so please be in touch with me if you're not satisfied with your performance. Okay? So now let's go and look at a sample of the online discussion. And this is an actual one that I revised just a little bit, because the original of this had been based on 2 texts, and that is not what you are required to do. You are only required to respond to 1 text. So this is the texts that they're reading here are a Hindu text from the Upanishads, and then a Buddhist text from some Buddhist scriptures, Theravada Buddhism. And the prompt, and I'm sorry, I don't have the prompt for you, but basically the prompt is, what is common about the view of the body in Hinduism and Buddhism, and its role in our becoming divine. It was something like that. Okay, so that was the prompt, to which this is the response. What I'm going to do is simply read this with you so that we can go over it, and I can show you and bring out a couple points as we go about the what makes this an excellent contribution. In the Maitri Upanishad, the physical human body is described as, quote, this ill-smelling, unsubstantial body, which is a conglomerate of bone, skin, muscle, marrow, flesh, semen, blood, mucus, tears, rheum, feces, urine, wind, bile, and phlegm. End quote. Hume, Part 1, page 3. So I'm going to stop right there. So what the student did is immediately go to the text. She framed this quote, though, by pointing out that here is what this text has to say about the physical body. Okay, so you see that opening phrase here, okay, that leads into then the quote. So the quote is integrated into the sentence in a very, very smooth way, and a way that is connected, so that what the quote says is connected with what she has led up to here. Okay, and then the quote is, all the quotation stuff here is accurate, and she uses the MLA inline citation, which is great, and so you have the author or editor in this case. You have Rather than just a strict page number, this was broken into parts. So I think there were 6 parts to this that I assigned. And so part 1 here, and then page 3. So that's in parentheses after the quote, and then the period for the sentence comes at the very end. Okay, so that's these are little details, I know, but they actually do make a difference when you're writing in, for a job, or, an application, or you're writing for your boss or something like that. It's little details like that that make a huge difference, because everybody will notice them. And when you get little details like that right, it shows that you're attentive, and that you care about the details. And caring about details is often very important in your work. And hey, this class is a job, so there you go. Next sentence. And in the Theravada Buddhist text, Samyutta Nikaya, disenchantment with one's own body is a key step in being liberated from the predicament of samsara. Samsara basically means suffering. And then the colon and a quote. Feeling disgust for the body, he becomes free from passion. Through freedom from passion, he is emancipated. Thomas, 88 and 89 through 89. Okay, so a couple things about this sentence. Again, a very, very well integrated quote, although using the colon, she decided to make the quote, sort of stand aside from what she was saying, which is fine. Then here, and up here, sorry, Maitreya Upanishad and Samyutta Nikaya, the titles are appropriately italicized. That's good. And notice that her interpretation of the text is already, of the quote, sorry, her interpretation of this quote is already started in the way that she leads into the quote. Because she says, this is what this text is saying, disenchantment with one's own body. Looky, feeling disgust for the body. You see how that is a way of glossing what disgust might mean. Okay, and there's going to be more about that here in just a moment. And further, she's made a point here. She's put in another key part of the interpretation of the quote that follows by saying a key step in being liberated from the predicament of samsara. Now that's an independent concept, the predicament of samsara. She's brought that in from her own knowledge gained from other parts of the reading, or maybe the class discussion or something like that. And she's connected it to then this key step in being liberated. So you see what this says. He becomes free from passion. Through freedom from passion, he is emancipated. So emancipated, liberated. You see how that works? So the gloss, the discussion of the quote is actually occurring in her own words leading into the quote. Very effective. Very effective. And then again, proper citation here. Different text. Thomas, that's the editor and translator, and then the page numbers, 88 to 89. All right, let's continue. While the footnote for this passage, in other words, the one that she just quoted, advises the reader that disgust, and that appeared here. Okay, so she is mentioning the word disgust. She's not using the word disgust. So that's why the single quotes are appropriate. She's mentioning the word. While the footnote for this passage advises the reader that disgust may not be the best English translation for nibbada, it is clear that the human body in Hinduism and Buddhism is neither a source of divinity, nor is its ultimate state one that is to be transformed by divine life. Wow, that's a lot packed into a sentence. One thing I like about what she decided to do here is really sum up and connect the two texts in one fairly complex sentence. So sentence complexity and sentence variety are good indications of confidence as a writer and effectiveness as a writer. So if every sentence was like that, it would be unreadable. But it's not, as we'll see. So let's look at this sentence a little closer, and I can show you what's so great about it, other than the sort of diction part of it, which is the complexity of it, an appropriate complexity, because she's bringing in the two different quotes and really paraphrasing them in the context then of this footnote, where she is showing evidence. She is demonstrating that she was a close reader because she paid attention to a footnote in the quote that she chose to talk about in her response. And so she worked in that detail into her response. Very, very good. So that's one very good thing about this response. While the footnote for this passage advises the reader discussed, may not be the best English translation for Nabata. So she's acknowledging, oh wow, there's difference of opinion about the appropriate way to translate Nabata. Okay. And if you remember, she herself used the word disenchantment, which is not the same thing as disgust. Clever. It is clear that the human body in Hinduism and Buddhism is neither a source of divinity. So let's stop right there. So what she's doing is saying that no matter how you translate Nabata, disgust, disenchantment, or aversion is another common one, that what all those meanings would have in common is something. Okay, it's clear that the human body in Hinduism and Buddhism is neither, and she's saying what they have in common are two things, or two things follow from that. It is it is not a source of divinity. Okay, so the body is not divine. Yep, that is accurate. That is what those texts are saying. So it's not the physical body, the physical human is not divine, nor is its ultimate state, that is the body, the pronoun its refers to the body, nor is its ultimate state one that is to be transformed by divine life. So that is a little more complicated, but the idea there is pretty clear. It is that the body's ultimate state, in other words, what is it becoming in the process of this freedom from passion, of this process of liberation? What is it becoming? What will happen to the body? Its ultimate state is one that nor is its ultimate state one that is to be transformed by divine life. So the divine life is that emancipation, that freedom from samsara, from passion. Okay, so the human being is being transformed by that divine life, but the body is not. So the body is not part of that picture of divine transformation. That's the claim there. Very, very good. That's excellent. And what that does is it's not limited to simply what the specific quotes that she's brought out, but is answering the prompt. The prompt was, what's the connection of the body to the divine life? Okay, and so that's an answer to that question here in discussing these quotes. It's really quite good. Okay, so then she doesn't stop there, however. So she goes on to say more about the body. It is a barrier to the higher life. Another way of saying divine life. It is a barrier to the higher life, an impediment to eventual freedom. Okay, notice there's a repetition there of barrier and impediment. Those are kind of the same things, but she's saying two different things. So it's a barrier to the higher life or divine life, and it's an impediment to eventual freedom, right? So that's a specific quality of the higher life. Okay, so that's a pretty good sentence. And notice also, it's a short sentence that follows a complex sentence. Also good. Okay, next sentence. An interesting question follows. How is this view of the body consistent with other teachings within the two religions, which claim that even in one's present embodied life, one is a temple of divinity, holiness, or purity? So notice here, this shows critical thinking, gang. This is so important. This is not simply saying, okay, here's my answer to Hunter's prompt, boom, and I give my answer. But it's going further. It's actually looking it's acknowledging additional questions that are connected to the question raised by the prompt and connected to her answer, her own answer to that prompt. So she's saying, this isn't just the end of the discussion. There's another question. How is this view of the body consistent with other teachings within the two religions, which claim that even in one's present embodied life, one is a temple of divinity, holiness, or purity? Another thing that's impressive about that is it's a way of taking my original prompt and recasting it, revising it, and making it focus on a more specific topic. Because in my original prompt, I said, what's the connection of the body to the divine life in the two religions? And here, what she's doing is saying that, look, there's a question here about the internal consistency of the teachings, where on the one hand, the body is something to be overcome. It's an impediment, a barrier. But on the other hand, we can still be this temple. A human being in the physical body can be this temple of divinity, holiness, or purity. So that's a far more specific problem that she is raising than the one that I started out with. Also excellent. Perhaps the reason both can be true is because the physical flesh and bone body is not part of the natural divinity of a human being. Okay, so she offers an answer to her own question, which is great, but this is not going to have, you're not going to have space now to flesh this out because she's already at the limit of the words. So, she offers it with, in a hesitant way, perhaps, right? Which is fine. I don't always encourage that because sometimes that kind of uncertainty can be fake, and it's I don't know. It's kind of a false modesty. So I tend to encourage people to avoid perhaps here, but since it's a question she raised herself, I don't mind it. If she had used this in response to my prompt and started up here with perhaps no. What you need to do in these contributions is you take a stand, a definitive stand in response to the prompt. So what she's doing here is not taking a definitive stand. She's giving a hypothesis, right? But it is to her own question. So I don't mind that at all. I think that's thoughtful. Perhaps the reason both can be true is because the physical flesh and bone body is not part of the natural divinity of a human being. Okay, so that's a really plausible explanation, right? Instead, it just houses the spirit or Atman. So here again, showing her, showing the closeness of her reading, the care that she put into the reading by bringing in some of the technical terms that are relevant here to what she just said. That the human being, it ultimately is not the body. The human being is Atman. Okay, so the body is just this house. That spirit or consciousness is what enables a human, that spirit or consciousness is what enables a human to become enlightened and thus is a source of his or her divinity. The body is only a temporary dwelling place for the spirit. So, expanding again on that previous sentence, and even though it went over the 200 word limit, that is a great way to finish, because what she's done then is connected not only her hypothetical or speculative answer here that is not supported with text, right? She didn't support this with any quotes, but it's plausible, given knowledge of the text. But here, what she's done is she's connected that to what she said earlier about the process of enlightenment, of this liberation, of this freedom, this emancipation. That's really, really good. So what that does is it shows how even to the very end, the very last sentence, it's all connected. It's one coherent thought that is developed in an interesting way. And this is why this particular online contribution scored a perfect score. I mean, there was nothing that I could dock her for in this contribution. I guess I could have if I wanted to be, cruel about the word count thing, because I say, 200 words, but it is a suggested word count. And 249, well, it's less than 250. So that tells me that there was some care taken to make this concise. And I guess that's where, if that one category about conciseness of the contribution, I could have made a point of that, but there's really just the thoughts here are so interesting that it really isn't fair, I don't think, to Docker for conciseness, because really it is concise, and it's got all the other things that I mentioned going for it. So I'm not saying that this is something that you can replicate as a model, like a fill in the blank thing, and just take exactly the words she said here and just change the words out and you've done it. It won't work like that for you. What I've tried to do is show you step by step the elements within the rubric that made this such an excellent contribution, and the kinds of things that you too can aim for and that you can do. So that's the end of my discussion of the discussion requirement for the class. I hope that was helpful, and I hope you find it a way to make the readings really your own, to really work over, and you will, in doing this assignment, you will feel a profound sense of accomplishment that you have understood something difficult, something challenging, and it makes you think. So good luck with it, and I'll see you soon in the next video.